Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Poison Pen. Tonight it's our pleasure to connect again with Brian Freeman, with whom we've had many actual events over the years, but I think, Brian, this might be our very first virtual event together.
It's true. That is true.
So Brian has had an interesting publishing career with various publishers, which we'll chat about. But the book we're talking about tonight is, in fact, his first into the Ludlum universe. It's called The Bourne Evolution. I think it's absolutely terrific. And in order to get the commercial out of the way early, I will say that Brian has, I hope, already signed numerous copies.
They should be on their way to you if they're not already there, yes.
No, they're not. That's why we have this miserable advanced reading copy of yours that follows in your book. But in any case, Brian has in fact signed books for us, and we'd love to have you order an autographed copy, and I think you'll be thrilled with it because this is a new start to a new Jason Bourne, and full of action, really exciting. I did a pitch for it, which you can listen to on Instagram, but we're going to talk now and see what Brian has to say about it. So Brian, why did you decide to step into the Ludlum universe?
Well, I got a call from my agent, gosh, probably about 18, 19 months ago that the folks at Putnam were signing on to bring Jason Bourne back, and was I interested in tossing my hat into the ring as a potential author. And I've been a Bourne fan my whole life, and a Ludlum fan my whole life. In fact, here's my well-thumbed copy of the Bourne Identity from 40 years ago that I've read an awful lot of times in my life. So I said, yeah, let's see what happens. And so my agent kind of put my name in there, and then there was sort of dead silence for I think 3 or 4 months. And I thought, oh well, they've decided to go another way, and that's fine. I'm sure there's lots of thriller writers who would love to have the opportunity to bring Jason Bourne back. And then last February, I got a call from my agent. I was actually up in Duluth doing an event at the bookstore at Fichters up there, and my agent said 5 words that will linger in my mind for a long, long time. Putnam wants you for Bourne. And so I called up Tom Colgan at Putnam and talked about what I wanted to do with the character, and put together a whole plot summary and some chapters for the estate to take a look at, and they loved it, and we were off to the races. So it truly has been it's kind of like life coming full circle. I mean, people have asked me, is it hard to get inside someone else's characters? And yet, I've known Jason Bourne even longer than I've known any of my own characters. I've known him since I was a teenager. So I really had a lot of fun getting inside Jason Bourne's head and kind of bringing this whole new look to where the series would go.
Well, I think you did a fabulous job, and I'm garbed here as a tourist in my sunglasses and my top from my favorite clothing store, which is located in Basseville, Quebec, right below the Chateau Frontenac, where the action for this book kicks off. So I'm dressed to please. But I did want to talk to you for a moment about other universes. As you know, we were the Cussler, still are, but a Cussler bookstore for a long, long time. And when Clive was writing alone, and then when he began to bring in co-authors as he got older and felt that he couldn't do all the heavy lifting for writing the books himself. And Putnam has a number of franchises or estate operations. They have the Robert Parker estate, they have the Tom Clancy estate, they've got you. I'm trying to remember, Patrick, who else? There's, I'm going blank, but I know there's at least one other.
Clancy mentioned.
And the Clancy's divided into both Jack Ryan Sr., which is Mark Cameron, and Jack Ryan Jr., which has been Mike Madden and is now going to be Don Bentley. So there can be movement, so to speak, within it as authors write for a while and then don't. I think their most successful one outside of the Cusslers and the Clancys is the Parker. I really love what Ace Atkins has done with Spencer to bring him forward. Reed Farrell Coleman did a wonderful job with Jesse Stone, and now Mike Lupica is writing both Sonny Randall. I thought he did a terrific job with the first 2 Sonny Randalls, but he's also going to be writing Jesse Stone. So Parker was nudging his way towards Sonny and Jesse as a couple, and now I think that Lupica having both of them might actually go in that direction. But what's great is, you know, they've kept the basic spirit of that universe, but they have modernized it. They have taken these characters, and you'd like to think that Parker or Clancy or Ludlum would have brought them forward. In fact, would have had to bring them forward. You know, would not be frozen in time. So it works well, I think, for your version, your update, and the original franchise to come.
Yeah, well, and you know, there have been so many iterations of Jason Bourne over the years. I mean, Ludlum did 3 Bourne novels, again going all the way back to 1980, so that was 40 years ago. And then you had, you know, Eric von Lustbader took over, and he did 11 Bourne novels, and of course then you've got all of the Matt Damon movies, which were so successful. And I may be one of the few people that remember when Jason Bourne was actually not Matt Damon, but Richard Chamberlain, in an ABC miniseries in 1988. So
Wow.
with Jacqueline Smith as Marie Saint Jacques. So you know, you see all of these iterations of Bourne, and obviously Bourne's original backstory goes back to Vietnam, and so trying to do a Bourne novel today, I really didn't want to try to build on any of those previous iterations. What I wanted to do was kind of take Bourne into the modern era, but really go back to Ludlum's original vision for the character and really sort of rediscover what has made Bourne such an iconic figure for all of these years. And I think what that's really about is kind of his basic fragility as a person. I mean, he's not kind of your classic superhero thriller hero. He's really struggling with that sense of identity. He's lost his memory. He doesn't know who he is. Not only does he have sort of no sense of his past, but he really has no sense of, you know, who he is as a person. Is he a moral man? Is he a killer? And I think it's that complexity and that struggle that really makes him appealing to readers. And that was really what I wanted to try to get back to in this book.
Well, I think you did an excellent job. I also think your action scenes are amazing. The way you blocked out that whole introduction, which, as I mentioned, Quebec, let's go there. Jason is wandering about below the Chateau Frontenac, one of the world's most iconic hotels, in my opinion. I've stayed there many times. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
I think it's still a Fairmont, but I'm not entirely sure.
That's correct, yeah.
Probably is. And the situation of the hotel above the river, above the plains of Abraham, where all that fabulous history played out, they're right below it. And so you can walk out of the hotel and step right into, you know, where Wolfe and Montcalm duked it out for who would
Right.
dominate Canada, the British or the French, where the Americans came up from Maine and tried to persuade the Canadians to join the American colonies, and the Canadians rebuffed them, saying, you know, no, not really interested in all that.
Oh, things don't change.
No. It's such an historic city, and I think at this point, a lot of people know, a lot of mystery fans know Quebec really for Louise Penny for Three Pines and Montreal, but not for Quebec, which
Right.
is much more French speaking, although Quebecois is a dialect of French in a way that, because I've traveled through the whole province, and even though I'm a French speaker, it's often difficult to understand in the villages and so forth their patois, which is also true in France after all. If you went to Britain.
Well, it's like traveling in Scotland. It's awfully hard to understand English.
Yes, exactly. But I think it's a very underserved major city, and so I'm thrilled that you have given it such a role. What interested you? Was it the geography? Was it the landscape? What is it that drew you to Quebec to start off this book?
Yeah, I think all of those things. I've been to Quebec myself. There was a crime fiction festival there a few years ago that I was a part of, and so Marsha and I had a chance to visit Quebec City, and I love the romance and the history of the city, and it's got such sort of wonderful dramatic venues, and I think that's always something that is sort of a part of Jason Bourne's universe, is some of these interesting locale. Certainly, they took great advantage of that in all of the movies. And so, as I was thinking about where to start the book, I wanted to start it in Canada because in the Bourne identity, Ludlum's original, Bourne has a relationship with Marie St. Jacques, a Canadian economist. And what I was trying to do in the Bourne evolution is have sort of a lot of little tiny tributes and echoes to the original book in the novel. And so one of the things I did here was the journalist that Bourne becomes involved with in the course of the novel is a Canadian journalist, Abby Laurent. And so I wanted to sort of bring Canada in right from the get-go, and I just thought that Quebec City was just the perfect place for chase scenes and drama going on in these romantic old buildings.
Well, it would certainly be spectacular if videoed. And the first times I went to Quebec were by car and by train. But the last time I was there was on a cruise down the St. Lawrence River that began in Montreal. And so when you come in, you're actually in Bastille, looking at the lower city, looking up at the hotel, whereas my normal orientation was to be in the hotel looking down. And they're connected now by a, what is it, an escalator, whatever it is. But it used to be a lot. I mean, when I was first there, I was like 12.
There was a lot of steps,
Yeah, it was a lot, yep. But I really hadn't spent a lot of time in the lower city, which turns out to be rich in art galleries and coffee shops, and my personal favorite clothing store, and I am convinced that the woman who owns the Grand Mouton is my size, because the only clothing store I've ever been in where I never had to have anything hemmed. I'm only 5'2". So, you know, I love the fact that I could walk in and, you know, buy things and walk out. And I've been really wanting to go back for that reason alone. But it's such a vibrant part of the city, and yet I think a lot of people spend their time in the upper part, you know, from the hotel and moving out rather than down in the lower part. So it was great to go there by boat.
Yes. Yeah, we spent a lot of time in the lower town when we were there, and we loved it as well. And I don't know, there's just something about the funicular. I definitely wanted to have a wonderful little fight scene going on in the funicular. So I love that scene in the book. It's one of my favorite scenes in the novel.
It's great, but I'm also glad you went out onto the river. There is an island right below the city, the name of which I'm blanking on. And there used to be an absolutely fabulous restaurant called L'Astre, the Hearth. And it was an old Quebecois farmhouse, and they cooked everything over this great open fireplace. And, you know, it was all stone. They picked you up at the parking lot in a horse and buggy, and, you know, it was the whole thing. And I absolutely loved it. And again, it's interesting to be out in the river on an island, now looking back up at the city and the chateau, you know, looming way up there on the skyline. So,
it's such a magnificent setting,
Right, so did you go down and tour that part too? Because you do send Bourne down, he hides out after the opening.
I didn't get down there myself, but I did a lot of research in that area so that I could kind of capture the feel of that area as well. It's obviously very different from Quebec City. So.
Well, it's quite rural. And agricultural. Yep, and lots of little villages. So.
Yeah, I kind of felt it had sort of almost a Cape Cod feel to it, even in the look of the architecture. So.
Yeah, I guess one can say that. Well, you mentioned the journalist because she's a key part of the opening scene and the action. They have a meeting arranged and code words and all kinds of stuff, and it all kind of goes south. But I was thinking about when I got to the end, this is not a spoiler for the plot, but it's virtually impossible for somebody like Jason Bourne to have a long-term romance.
Yeah, and you know the thing is, yet it's also something that he really wants and needs. I think that's one of the fascinating things about Bourne. If you look at the Matt Damon movies, I think they portray Bourne in the movies as very much this isolated loner. And in fact, when you watch the movies, pay attention next time to the long stretches that go on where there's literally no dialogue for Matt Damon in the movie. I mean, long stretches will go through where he has absolutely nothing to say, and it reinforces this idea of Bourne as this you know sort of cynical loner, and it works in the movies, but I don't think that's really the essence of Bourne's character. I think when you read Ludlum's novels, you realize that it's his relationship with Marie that is what drives this person, and so I think him being a loner is sort of more by necessity rather than by choice, because he ultimately feels that anyone that he gets close to, he's putting in jeopardy. And so I think that's the struggle he faces in any of these relationships. He kind of draws close like a magnet and then gets pushed away because he doesn't want to put these people in jeopardy.
Well, that's the old Superman Lois Lane dynamic.
Yeah.
Well, it is, I mean, that's why I always hit out as Clark Kent, because, any mortal person that was around him was always going to be in jeopardy. We did a virtual launch for Brad Thor last week, and Scott Harvath, it's the same thing. Scott was right up on the brink of a long-term relationship, and then it all shattered, and here he is again, and you can't really have that lifestyle. You can't, be ranging around the world, pitting yourself against villains and all the rest of it.
Domestic bliss just doesn't work in thriller.
No, but I agree with you. I mean, John D. MacDonald didn't, if I remember right, Travis McGee had like a new woman in every book. It was sort of like Stone Barrington. He has a few long time, but mostly Stone's got at least one new woman in his bed in every Stuart Woods book.
Mr. Bosch has had his share of dalliances as well. So
yeah, I do think, and it's a slightly different problem, but comes up a lot when women are the action heroes, but then it's not so much a spouse but a child that becomes a major issue. Can you really put yourself at risk and take these kinds of chances if you're a mother, or if you're going to put your child in jeopardy? Now, I don't know if you've run across Robert Povey yet, but I'm going to do you a huge favor. If you have not read City of Windows, or the new book, Under Pressure, Dr. Lucas Page, astrophysicist, generally mangled human being, and incredible, he has an ability to see patterns in numbers and all, and you'd love him. I mean, he's just fabulous. Unfortunately, Povey lives in Toronto, so, we're going to talk to him, but we can't get him here, whatever. But I think Lucas Page is going to be a new franchise character, but he does have a wife and some adopted children, and they are really at risk in this second book, which is causing him a lot of problems. And, John Sanford has said more than once to me that he, thought seriously about dropping Weather and the kids into the Atlantic in order to free up Davenport, to do this or that, and it comes... I mean, he really does. Of course, John says things like that. He's never straight. But even for Lucas Davenport, having a family is a worry and a constraint as well as a blessing.
Yeah, it is. Although I find it interesting in my Jonathan Stride series up in Duluth. I think that the relationship between Stride and Serena and the introduction of the teenager Kat into the mix, that for me, that's actually provided a lot of fodder for the drama and emotion of the series. So in the detective, the procedural side, I actually think it can be a plus, as opposed to on the thriller side, where it's a lot harder to work out. So because naturally the thriller heroes tend to be in a lot more physical danger than the detectives typically are.
Right. So what about Treadwell? I mean, Treadwell can't ever really go away, can it?
Treadstone?
Treadstone. Why do I keep calling him Treadwell? Sorry.
Treadstone's always back there, and of course, we've in the same way of splitting franchises now, they've created a Treadstone franchise that Josh Hood is writing as well. I think there always has to be kind of this shadowy government conspiracy in the Ludlum world. I think that's very much a sort of a function of the stories that Ludlum told, and it I think comes out of the environment in which Ludlum was writing. I mean, so much of his stories were influenced by Vietnam and Watergate in the 70s, and the kind of distrust of government and the sort of shadowy conspiracy theories, all that, sort of flowed through his books. And one of the things I found as I was thinking about the plot of Bourne Evolution was that, there are a lot of parallels between, where society is today and where society was back in the 1970s. You have a same, divisiveness, you have a lot of distrust of government, you have a lot of, conspiracy theories going on both sides. And so it kind of felt like this was the natural time to bring Jason Bourne back into that environment, because there were just a lot of parallels to the world in which Ludlum was writing.
That's really true, including a looming Cold War, only this time,
Yeah.
with China rather than Russia. But there was always that anxiety that hung over all of us during the Cold War that, someday something terrible would happen. So I agree. I think bringing him back at the moment. I also think, for this kind of character, you have to have big bucks behind them. You have to have big tech. You have to have, and it's very hard to manage that sort of budget in any
On a
sort
budget, yeah.
Yes. So the government's kind of a natural, although, it's going to be harder when our government is going to be basically going trillions in debt. It's going to be harder to find funding for shadow operations.
You'll note that's why I had Bourne affiliated with big tech in this book. So
Yes.
sort of the limitless deep pockets there. So.
Well, that's a really good point, because the way it's going, Amazon's going to have way more money than the federal government, and I'm not sure how we're ever going to sort of right that balance again. We can't even see where we're going in another month, let alone 6 months from now. So it's an interesting time to write a thriller. You have to ask yourself whether you can bring anything current into a book that you're working on, or whether that's going to date it so, because we don't know how it's going to come out.
Because wait a week and the world will look completely different. So.
Well, very true. Most of the authors that we have talked to are writing either before the pandemic or after the pandemic or kind of around the pandemic, but it's it's a real problem to try to guess how this is going to go and then wind up with a book that will be ridiculous when it publishes, since you're normally looking anywhere from 12 to 24 months between the inception of the book and the actual publication. It's not like journalism, where you can write something and then redo it in a week or two. It just doesn't go that way.
Right. Well, and that's why I like bringing in sort of, ripped from the headlines themes into the novels, and I'm always kind of careful that I'm looking at things that have staying power. And, in this book, one of the things I thought was sort of one of the more fascinating issues that we're all struggling with is that whole concept of big tech and the threats of data privacy, and so the concept of not only the big data hack that is at the core of this, which we've seen time and time again in terms of these monster hacks of private information, but also the way that social media is manipulating people's behavior. And so we have in the Bourne Evolution this company Presix, which claims that it can predict what you're going to do before you even know it. Well, of course, it's not that they're predicting, it's that they're actually influencing and shaping behavior.
There's a very good book that I think it was Putnam also published called The Voter File. Earlier, maybe it was in May, we did an event with him. And actually the voter file is using social media and all the data that it gets to predict how people will vote. And the plot kicks off because a woman contacts a reporter who's out in the cold, disgraced and so forth, and looking for a story, and says to him that based upon her work with the voter file in Wisconsin, in a relatively small town, it was impossible for the election result to be true. And then off we go into, manipulation and so forth. I think the election we're looking at is going to be hostage to all kinds of things. And I'm just so astonished. Did you read about this weird right-wing television or radio station that has what they call a medical researcher, and she wants to put out a theory that...
Yeah, we thought about this on Twitter going around.
Unbelievable that Dr. Fauci actually planned this, what they call it, the plandemic, that he actually created this virus and sent it to China. And, for what reason, I am unable to discern, but, their general standard is, well, unless you can prove it false, it can be true, which is so hideous a syllogism and logic that you can hardly believe
But
it.
it worked beautifully for thrillers, though.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it just seems to me that social media has allowed, all of this just completely crackpot stuff to circulate.
I mean, social media has done, so much good in terms of bringing people together, and yet there's such a corrosive underbelly to it as well. I mean, that's one of the things I dealt with in my Stride book Marathon. Was I sort of made Twitter really a character in Marathon. That was how so much of the information gets passed around, and that's how I based it on the whole idea of the bombing in Atlanta, when the security guard was falsely accused of the bombing, and sort of was saying, well, what if you had something similar to that going on, but in the age of social media, where these rumors and this misinformation can just spread at the speed of light, and all of a sudden, instead of a handful of folks thinking that someone is guilty of something, you have literally millions of people who all believe that someone is guilty, and it can just destroy someone's life like that.
It really can. People often ask me why I named the bookstore the Poison Pen, and I pointed out that long ago, that gossip, the kind of thing that Twitter spreads, was spread by people writing actual letters full of gossip called Poison Pen letters. And they were hideously destructive. People could commit suicide, marriages were broken up, it was a kind of an Agatha Christie kind of a thing. But it's certainly...
Lucy Lemon shows.
Yes, it's exactly the same thing. Now we have the whole cancel culture going on.
Right.
And, and the thing that's so fascinating to me is that people are willingly surrendering all of their privacy for convenience and for some sort of fame. We see it when we do book events here, that how important it is to people to have photos. They are desperate for a staged photo with the author, and it's a way of sharing a celebrity moment, of creating a story of your own life, and so people can write their own lives through social media.
There are consultants now who will actually stage Instagram vacations specifically so that people can go out and take staged photographs in these places to build their Instagram account.
And you can buy Instagram accounts. I mean, I have built ours from scratch by doing it myself. But if I wanted to, I could go out and buy 100,000 Instagram names or something. And then if you manage to hold on to a tenth of that, then you're looking pretty good. But to me, that's completely dishonest, also useless. But there are now people making whole careers out of stuff like that.
Right.
So there's an awful lot for you to write about. Are you?
That's because there's a lot of fodder out there for the thriller world. Yeah.
Oh Lord, yes. So are you contracted to do a couple of them, or is this one of these book by book contracts?
I'm actually working on the second Bourne novel right now, in fact. So that should be out next summer as well. Yep.
All right, and Jonathan Stride, coming back to him, your 10th Jonathan Stride is coming out on September 22nd. He's had a...
Funeral.
Sorry?
Funeral for a Friend is the title, yes.
Thank you, right. Jonathan's had kind of a checkered publishing career, so he's now with a relatively new crime fiction publisher called Blackstone, which has made its name in audio, but now has taken up print books as well. So this is your first book with them, right?
It's my first book where they've got the print and ebook rights. Blackstone has been my audiobook publisher on the Stride series literally since the beginning in 2005. So I've got a long relationship with the folks at Blackstone.
I think they're doing some really interesting and creative print, unusual books that I read another one. I'm going to share it with Patrick because it's Southwest New Mexico, Native American. The plot's not blazingly original, but the way he writes about New Mexico is just fabulous. Cool. Great landscape. So I've been
Blackstone's got some great diverse books coming out. I think they're really doing a terrific job of acquisition, and I'm excited to have Funeral for a Friend with them, and bring Stride back. It's been a couple years now since my last Stride novel, Alter Ego, and and a lot's been going on with Stride off stage too, because I don't know if you know, but AMC has actually signed on and is looking at developing The Burying Place into a television series. In fact, I just had a chance to look at the pilot script last week, so we'll keep our fingers all crossed that they leap on this and bring it to the air. I think it would just make a terrific series, and Kelly Masterson, the writer, the showrunner behind it, has just done a great job on the pilot script.
Well, that's exciting. So we'll be back talking to you at the end of September then about Jonathan.
Exactly.
Let me ask Patrick, do we have any questions that anybody has?
Not really.
Or comments?
Well, there are people that are watching and kind of chiming in. I have a question for you, Brian. Is there a Robert Ludlum Bible that you have to consult when working on these books?
You know, there really isn't. The folks at Putnam and the folks at the estate have really been terrific to work with, and they have managed this process with a real light touch, which I appreciate. You know, this was the first time I've tried to do anything, you know, in one of these sort of legacy projects, and I didn't honestly know what to expect in working on it, but they've been enormously supportive. In fact, when I turned in the manuscript to the Bourne Evolution and we went through the edits, Tom Colgan at Putnam sent the manuscript over to the folks at the estate, and they came back and said, we don't want to change a word. So I was thrilled with that, and he told me that's a fairly rare experience, so I was real pleased. I think the goal of the estate here really is they want to honor Ludlum's legacy, and they want to see his name and his creativity continue, and that was really my goal too. I mean, I've been a Ludlum fan my whole life, and I've read all of his books many times, and I've been a huge Bourne fan since I was 17 years old. So to me, that really was the opportunity here, was to do something that was really true to Ludlum's original vision, and to take that iconic character and bring him forward. I mean, if you had told me, if you told me 40 years ago when I was 17 that someday Robert Ludlum's name and my name would both be on that book cover, I would have said, "Oh, you're crazy." So.
Let's see. You may have already mentioned this, but is there a possibility of a new Bourne TV or film project?
You know, I don't have any information about that. I'm not sure. I know there are a lot of fans out there that would love to see it, and I guess it's kind of like, you know, the Bond folks trying to convince Daniel Craig to go out one more time. We'll see if the producer can convince Matt Damon to have another go at Bourne.
Or maybe not Matt Damon. You know,
Or maybe.
This is a different Jason Bourne.
Yeah, this is true. I have a rather younger Jason Bourne in this book, so who knows who they'd come up with.
Are there any other kind of legacy authors that you're a big fan of that you would like to take a stab at continuing a book?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. Honestly, if there was one author that I would love to partner with their estate on, it would be James Michener. I would love to have the opportunity to tackle one of Michener's kinds of projects. I was such a huge fan of his books growing up. So if any Michener family are out there thinking, "Oh, that's an interesting idea," get a hold of my agent. Yeah, I'd love to do a Michener book.
Wow, you would have to have a giant team of researchers to do a real Michener book.
Well, that's for sure. That would be fun research, though.
Man, we was research heavy. I will never forget reading The Source. I thought The Source.
One of my favorite books.
Everybody has a different Michener they bond to, but for me,
Yeah.
The Source was absolutely. I mean.
Mine too. One of my favorite books of all time.
Right,
Yeah.
and incredibly informative. I just, I think about it a lot. Much of what he brought up comes up in, reading Daniel Silva, for example. You know, it's good if you've read The Source, so you have some background in some of the things that he writes about Israel. Just an amazing book.
Exactly.
And all roads lead back to Richard Chamberlain too, right?
That is true. That is true. So someone was just commenting online that they remembered the miniseries as well, and I said, yeah, that was back in the era when apparently there was only one actor on in television, because you figure he did Bourne and he did Shogun and he did the Thornbirds. So everywhere you turned around, there was Richard Chamberlain.
You know, that is so true. He was an almost too pretty man for what he did. No, he was. You know, he really, if you go back and look at him, you know, he had that sort of classic high cheekbone, narrow face, and all the rest of it. I remember him as the priest in the Thornbirds, and and he was wonderful in Shogun. I think that Clavel is getting a reboot. Isn't Shogun getting a reboot?
Oh, is that right? Yes, so. I think you may be right about that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I ran across that fairly recently. There's now there are so many streaming channels you can't even keep up. I have to have a notebook now, because we start watching stuff and then we can't remember. Where was it?
Now James Clavell trivia, did you know that he wrote To Sir With Love?
No.
Yes, he did.
Wow. No, I did not. You know, authors didn't used to be quite so genre specific or labeled. Lots of fiction writers wrote all over the place, you know. Herman Wouk was another one of those, like Mishner, big picture novelist. Remember the Caine Mutiny with Humphrey Bogart, and then
Well, that was what I grew up with in the '70s. I mean, you had Mishner and you had Leon Uris and Irving Wallace and folks like that, and those were the authors I loved growing up, and that's one of the reasons I write thrillers, but I don't tend to write sort of traditional thrillers. They're sort of more dramatic, more emotional, and I think it goes back to how much I enjoyed those kind of authors growing up.
Yeah, no, I can easily believe that. Those are really rich novels. Those were, you know, my early reading days were a lot earlier than your reading days, but nonetheless, I did read a lot of them. Anything else?
Marcia asks about this new Bourne book. Do you have to have read any of the previous Bourne books to get into this one?
Oh yeah, good question. And no, this is a complete standalone, a complete reboot of Bourne. So you can dive right in. You don't need to have read any of the other books. You don't need to have seen any of the movies. So now, if you want to imagine, you know, Matt Damon in the streets of Quebec, that's perfectly fine. But no, you can dive right in.
You know, I'm sorry, but I just don't see Matt Damon in your book. I thought about it. I've watched the Bourne book, and when I read this, I did not see Matt Damon. It really isn't him.
No, I totally hear you. And I was trying to write it in such a way that if movie folks wanted to kind of picture Matt Damon in there, they could do that. And that really kind of wasn't my vision for the character, but you know, it also works out just fine for movie fans. And I think with movie fans, once they've got a hero's face in their head for the movie, they're always going to kind of put that actor in there.
Let's see. Anne asks, what are you reading these days?
Oh, what am I reading these days? You know, the funny thing is that I can't really read my own genre anymore. You know, when you write suspense all day long, picking up a suspense novel at the end of the day kind of feels a little like work. So I end up reading a lot of nonfiction history biographies. I'm actually reading a very lighthearted book right now called Midnight at Chernobyl, which is it's an astonishing book about the Chernobyl disaster. Beautifully done and exhaustively researched. So it's a really good book. And so I read a lot of that, and I actually find that reading nonfiction and histories and biographies actually sort of seeds my imagination for thrillers, because you really just learn a lot about people and history, and you can sort of imagine how things happen, and it sort of ends up pouring itself over into plot concepts.
That's a really excellent point. I'm going to make a little pitch here too and say I'm doing a section in our August book news of nature writing. There are some amazing books coming out, just beautiful books about the natural world, not necessarily framed in climate disaster, although the one about the whales certainly is, but you know, great book about owls, great book about whales. The H's for Hawk, Helen MacDonald is back with a different book. I think it's right at the moment, reading nature writing is a very refreshing and very soothing kind of a thing, unless you really panic over the environment situation, which lurks in the background.
Yeah, well, and you've got some mystery writers that are great nature writers as well. I mean, Paul Doiron is terrific in that regard.
You know, I tell you, One Last Lie is one of my favorite July thrillers. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. He does I'm so glad he's getting more recognition. This is his 11th book for Mike Bowditch, the main game warden. And it's been a bit of a climb for him, but I just think he's doing amazing work.
Yeah, question. How do you go about writing such realistic female characters?
Ooh, that's a good question. I really love creating female characters, and of course Marcia is a psychology major, so that kind of helps me too in terms of understanding the female mind. Certainly, when she's the first reader on all my books, so if I get anything wrong in that regard, she'll be the first one to tell me. But you know, I kind of think in terms of all characters that if you have an understanding of you know where they've been in life and who they've dealt with and the experiences they had, you can sort of understand how they're going to approach any given situation. So if I can kind of get inside the heads of those characters, then they'll start talking to me, whether they're men or women. My previous book, The Deep Deep Snow, is actually written in a female first person, which was the first time, not only the first time I'd done that with a female character, but that was the first time I'd done that with a mystery and thriller, to write in the first person. And it was a really fascinating experience getting to know the heroine, Shelby Lake. It was as if she needed to kind of reach a point of trusting me to tell her story, and so we were kind of doing a little bit of battle in the early chapters of her kind of keeping things from me and me trying to really get to know her. And we reached a point in one particular chapter that I had never really thought was going to be an important chapter in the book, and yet in the course of that chapter she suddenly revealed something very significant about her past, and it was just sort of that was when the floodgates opened, and from that point Shelby trusted me, and we were able to kind of write the rest of the book together. So I think that's kind of how that works. I mean, it really is developing relationships with the characters.
Well, Brian, it's really been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so excited I'll get to do this again before too long.
Exactly. It's always a lot of fun. And yes, only a couple more months, and we'll do it again with Stride. So.
We will. Yeah, I mean, we've been doing this over, as I say. There was a point when Stride, if I remember right, was only published in the UK. We had to import them.
Yeah, the Cold Knower. I think it was probably a year before the U.S. edition came out, because there was a lot of things going on with who owned what publishers. So.
Right. So it's not. That leads me to ask you: is the Stride backlist going to be available in any one place? You said the audiobooks are all with Blackstone, but are there?
Yeah, the audiobooks are all with Blackstone. You know, we'll see. It may kind of depend on what happens with everything that's going on with AMC. That may kind of open up some possibilities if they can get that rolling. So we'll see. I would love to see everything back back in paperback and back under one roof. We'll see what the next couple of years hold. So.
Sounds wonderful. Well, thank you for your time this evening. Have a wonderful rest of the night. And I thank all of you for joining us tonight. It's really been great to reconnect with Brian. And again, I encourage you. This is just an amazing book. I truly enjoyed it, and it will make you want to go to Quebec as soon as you possibly can. Be sure you book at the Frontenac ahead of time. You can't just walk in. Good night.
Good night.